Hello, and you're very welcome to episode 2 of The Fifth Court, a podcast on legal affairs presented by my good self, Peter Leonard, barrister.
And myself, Mark Tottenham, barrister and editor of Decisis.ie.
Mark, this is episode number 2. I hope it won't be a difficult second album. We got a great reaction to last week's interview with Mr. Justice Gerald Hogan.
Yeah, we had him on speaking about the Free State Constitution and about the role of a judge and how neutral a judge can be. And anybody who hasn't had a chance to listen to that episode, it's still available on all the major podcasting apps.
And what about the classical music?
Absolutely.
Did you nip into Tower Records and have a look at the Sibelius section?
I listened to it on Spotify on my way home.
Silence in the Fifth Court.
After the Supreme Court last week, this week our interviewee comes from the world of corporate law. And we're delighted to have Karyn Harty in studio. Many of you will know Karyn over the years as a leading partner in McCann FitzGerald, but she's recently made the move to Dentons, and we're going to talk to Karyn about that. We're going to talk to her about her involvement in Ireland for law and her belief that diversity has still a little bit of a distance to go in corporate law firms. So that's going to be really interesting. But before we get to that, Mark, we're going to review some important decisions from the courts. And we're going to start with a case called Keating and Shannon Foynes Port Company Limited.
Yeah, so this is a very interesting case. Shannon Foynes Port Company is a fully state-owned company. But like all state-owned companies, it has its own board. And the case here involved a chief executive officer of the company. For 7 years, he was told he was entitled to performance-related pay. They had a remuneration committee who had made a decision to recommend performance-related pay. However, the board had discretion not to pay it. Now, in the background, the fact that this company is state-owned meant that the government is the sole shareholder, and there had been an indication, a government policy essentially, that performance-related pay, certainly in the difficult years, sort of between 2009 and 2013, I suppose, shouldn't be paid. And so despite the recommendation of the remuneration committee, the directors decided not to pay him his performance-related pay.
Okay, so it came down to the duty of the directors of the board.
Yeah.
So we know the shareholder is the state. The state was saying, hold off and giving these people their money, but the chief executive wanted his bonus-related payment, and the directors had a decision to make. And Mr. Justice Sanfey came down in favour of the fiduciary duty of directors to make a decision that was in the interest of the company and not the shareholder.
Yes, it's a difficult distinction between the company and the shareholder. But I suppose in the overall scheme of things, where if a company is, say, recruiting somebody to a high level and is saying, well, you'll be entitled to certain performance-related pay, and then they arrive and they find that the shareholder is blocking that, then that could be arguably not in the interest of the company, even though the shareholders obviously are effectively the owners of the company.
So this was a decision in the High Court. Will it go to the Court of Appeal, do you think?
I couldn't know.
Who knows? Maybe the state might want to challenge that one. We don't know. Okay, let's move on to criminal cases. And we're going to look at some criminal cases that appeared in the Criminal Court of Appeal. Both concerned the length of sentences that were opposed. The appeals were based on that. Let's take a look at the case of DPP versus Flynn first, Mark. Yeah,
I know this is in many ways a very sad case. The accused in this case was stopped by An Garda Síochána basically on his way. I think he had been deputed to collect a large amount of drugs. I think it was 87,000 euros worth of methamphetamine. So he pleaded guilty. Now, I suppose what's worth saying is that this is what they call a Section 15A offence. So anybody who is caught, who is convicted of being in possession of over 13,000 euros worth of narcotics, there is an automatic minimum sentence of 10 years. Now, that automatic minimum doesn't apply in certain circumstances, including where there's a plea of guilty. And what the judge did in this case was imposed a 5-year sentence. Now, the concern, the reason that this was appealed, because obviously 5 years is a lot lower than the mandatory minimum, the reason that it was appealed was that the accused in this case had a history of heroin addiction. It appears that the reason he got involved in this particular enterprise was arising from a drug debt, but also he had a sad family background in that his family had split up, and he was the sole carer for his son,
yes,
who suffered from schizophrenia. And obviously, your heart bleeds for anybody in these circumstances where effectively the son is going to be left without his primary carer.
So what we're talking about here are mitigating factors.
Yeah.
The individual in question was 50 years of age. He had a lot of prior convictions, and that obviously will come into play when the judge is deciding on the appropriate sentence. But there is, a factor, it can be factored in that if somebody has a dependent and the dependent is reliant on them and exclusively reliant on them, which seemed to be the case in respect of the individual in this case, that can be taken into account. Now, obviously, the Court of Appeal felt maybe that the High Court judge had taken that into account because they didn't give any further leniency in terms of their decision.
Now, it's worth saying that the role of the Court of Appeal in reviewing a sentence is not to say we think the sentencing judge got it right or wrong, but really to say whether the sentencing judge got it within the appropriate range. And what they said that was there was no error in principle on the part of the sentencing judge, that in this particular case, notwithstanding this family circumstances, where there's such a large amount of drugs involved, anybody who's involved in this kind of enterprise knows that it is a serious matter. And unfortunately for this particular individual, they upheld the sentence.
Okay, let's move to another case. And this is another case that was before the Court of Appeal. And the Court of Appeal took a slightly different approach in this case.
Yeah, so this is a case, DPP in Kinsella, where the accused was found in possession of a stolen vase worth €500. Now, he'd originally been charged with the theft of the vase, but when it came to sentencing, he only pleaded guilty to possession of stolen property. And the sentence that he was given in the circuit court was 20 months in respect of the offence. Now, he had quite a history of, he had 13 previous convictions for burglary, 6 for theft and 6 for unlawful taking of a motorised vehicle. But in this case, it appears that the sentencing judge in the circuit court had made comments that suggested that the judge thought that he had been responsible for the theft in the first place. Now, obviously, if you're not convicted of the theft, you are presumed to be innocent of the theft.
Yes.
And therefore, he could only be sentenced in relation to the possession of the stolen property.
Okay. Now, the circumstances by which he obtained this crystal vase were kind of interesting, weren't they?
Well, I think they didn't go into a whole lot of detail into how he had.
Did he claim he was intoxicated at the time?
There might have been a claim of that sort.
He turned up in a cafe or something, and he tried to offer this vase for sale. And I think that's how eventually the guards got hold of him. Anyway, sorry, proceed, Mark. Well,
I suppose the issue is that the Court of Appeal looked at the sentencing judge's comments and then took the view that the 20-month sentence in this case, notwithstanding his extensive history of burglary and theft, decided that 20 months was excessive, and they reduced it to 15 months.
Okay, and there was a sad aspect to this case as well. The individual was 36 years of age, I believe, had spent 14 years in prison.
Yeah.
He was a repeat offender, so
and
that
also
would be
had
taken
addiction
into account.
issues like the other case. But I mean, that's just so common, unfortunately, in our criminal courts.
So in our two cases, we had one that the Court of Appeal felt, no, we're not going to introduce any reduction. And in the second case, they did. They reduced the sentence by a quarter.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, very interesting cases there, Mark. I am delighted to welcome to the studio Karyn Harty, who's a very well-known corporate lawyer in Dublin. Karyn, you were with McCann FitzGerald for many years. Many of our listeners will be aware of that. And you've recently moved to Dentons. So big move, and I think it's only just in the last 2 weeks.
Yes, that's right. I'm only there 2 weeks, and I suppose it is. I was in McCann's for 24 years. Would have been 25 in May next year. So I suppose I might have been regarded as a bit of a piece of the furniture there, but I'm not going to make the mistake that Lot's wife made. I'm going to look forward, and I'm really delighted to be part of the Dentons team.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about Dentons, and I see in the blurb for Dentons, it is the world's biggest law firm.
It is, yeah. It's an extraordinary size, actually. I think I'm right in saying 12,000 lawyers.
Wow, okay.
And a huge number of support staff as well around the world. So it has
this new Dublin
big
office.
coverage.
So we're going to get into that. But I know you want to look forward, unlike Lot's wife. But let's go back to the start. Just a little bit of biog. We enjoy a little bit of biog on this show. So where does Karyn Harty come from?
Karyn Harty comes from an unlikely place, I think is fair to say. I grew up in a place called Carrickfergus, of the song, and if I have a few drinks on me, I might even sing it for you. Exactly. grew up there and went to school in Belfast and studied at Queen's, although I was encouraged not to go to Queen's when I was at school. I was encouraged to leave Northern Ireland like so many other people from my background. But I was a bit, what we say in Antrim, I was a bit thran, a bit stubborn, and I decided that I would go to Queen's anyway. So I studied law at Queen's, not thinking I was going to be a lawyer. But then I got a real graw for the love, or for the law, and managed to get myself an apprenticeship, which were very hard to get in those days. And the rest is history, I suppose.
Okay, and straight into McCann's, was it?
No, I qualified in Belfast, was apprenticed with Cleaver, Fulton and Rankin, as they then were. They're now known as CFR. And I worked there for almost a year, and then I got an offer I couldn't refuse from McCann's. So I came down.
You worked there for 24 years. And when you left, what was your role with McCann's?
I was a litigation partner. So I was a partner there for about 17 years.
And just reflecting on some of the big cases you would have been involved in, because I know you were very active and you were in a lot of high-profile cases.
Yeah, I suppose I'm probably best known for the work I did on for IBRC in respect of asset recovery. In relation to the Quinn family, and also the case in relation to David Drum and his bankruptcy.
Okay.
That's probably the cases people would know me best for.
You did a little bit of defamation as well. I have a memory in the back of my head. Yeah, yes.
Media defence. Yeah, ever since I was an apprentice, actually. So it's an area of my practice I really love, and I still do it. I've, I suppose, been involved in a number of high-profile jury trials over the years. But you know, it's not all about the high profile either. And I've done a lot of cases quietly over the years that weren't high profile, but which were of huge importance to the clients. So, you know, I've always had a mix. And, you know, my practice really spans commercial litigation, white collar defence and regulatory advice, and then media defence. And I would have done a lot of financial services work as well. But I'm probably best known these days for fraud and asset recovery work and the white collar.
So you left the mothership, if I can call it that, McCann FitzGerald, and you wanted a new challenge, which I think is a wonderful thing. How does that come about? Did you get a phone call? Did you look at the small ads in the Irish Times? How do you find a new job?
How do you find it? I think the new job found me, is the
kind
truth.
of guessed as much, but anyway.
Look, you know, it's a great opportunity. And I've always been of the mindset that life should be an adventure. And sometimes opportunities come along at the right time for you personally, and that's very much the situation here. Dentons is a really interesting firm in the Irish market, I think, and I know we'll come on to that, but certainly it didn't take too much to pique my interest in terms of what they were offering, and the proposition that they have very much spoke to my skill set. So there we are.
So you've been taken on as head of litigation for their Irish operation.
That's right.
Now, Dentons, we know there's a lot of international firms are setting up and establishing themselves in Dublin at the moment, and maybe other parts of Ireland. Why are Dentons coming to Ireland?
Well, Dentons have been in Ireland for 2 years now at this point. And, you know, I wouldn't have been interested in a move to a toehold operation, if I can call it that. As a number of the international firms have gone for that sort of setup where they have a very small presence in the Irish market, and they're really waiting to see, I think, what will happen. That would not have been of interest to me. What was of interest to me in relation to Dentons is that they have already, I have to say, within a very short space of time, established themselves as a powerhouse in the Irish legal market. And I did a lot of due diligence, as you can imagine, before taking a leap like this. And I was hugely impressed with what they've achieved up to this point.
Okay.
So, and when a firm like Dentons comes to Ireland, I mean, presumably if they want to make an impression, they are effectively headhunting from a number of different firms. I mean, are you working now with people who have been sort of leading litigators from a number of different Dublin firms that have now moved across to Dentons?
Yeah, it's a very interesting model, I suppose. We have partners who were previously with a range of different large firms in the Irish market. And I think what's interesting about the way that Dentons have approached it is that they have really gone for quality. And I'm not saying that in an arrogant way, but I just think it's very important. If you're going to build the sort of operation that Dentons are building and have built already, you do need people who are going to attract key clients and be able to really hit the ground running. And that's the approach they've taken. So,
and can I just ask, the reason that there weren't so many international firms in Ireland until the last few years, was there a change with the 2015 Legal Services Regulation Act, where suddenly once limited liability partnerships could come into Ireland, that kind of opened the door? Because you tended to find that a lot of these international firms, there were LLPs in lots of different countries, but we didn't have that. And did the Shatter legislation effectively open the door to that kind of firm opening up here?
It's a really good question. I don't know that was much of a motivator. I know that a number of firms have moved to LLP status over the last few years. I'm not sure it's a key differentiator in terms of the decisions. I think firms that have made the decision to come into the Irish market have their eyes open and they're looking at the Irish market as being quite different to a lot of other markets and very dynamic.
In what way?
Well, if you look at the huge number of tech companies that have positioned themselves here, pharma companies, medical devices, manufacturers, you have such a high quality of international firms that have positioned themselves in Ireland. It's an easy decision to make, actually, to get into the Irish market. I think the Irish market is not straightforward for an entrant, and certainly, as I said, one of the reasons I was really impressed by Dentons is because they have really established themselves very quickly, doing very high value work, and that's, I think, very impressive what they've achieved in the short amount of time.
And sorry. No, Mark, please.
Well, I was just wondering. I mean, a Dentons, a firm like that obviously has a global presence. Are they sort of following the same model as say, accountancy firms like KPMG and PwC and I suppose Goldman Sachs, in that they're international, and presumably a lot of their clients are international as well? So that if you're advising Google or whatever, that you're not just taking them on an Irish basis. I mean, Dentons must, or I don't know if Google is a client, but they must be advising multinationals that operate in lots of different countries and advising them on their legal issues sort of on a transnational basis.
Yes, and that was something that was attractive to me because I have had quite an international practice for the last number of years. So it's quite a good fit with my skill set and experience. You're absolutely right. The global coverage piece is very important, but what I particularly liked about the Dentons model, which I have to say is really unusual, is that they don't have a sort of a structure where there is a mothership, if you like, in one particular jurisdiction and everybody else looks to that jurisdiction. It's actually quite a flat structure, surprisingly. So while it's global, they call it polycentric. I'm not quite sure what polycentric means. I'm sure I will learn that. But what I take it to mean and understand it to mean is that they have local offices in their local jurisdictions that are very much local firms, but they are operating within a global framework.
Okay. Well, as you said, it was a very attractive offer to you, Karyn, and obviously you went with it. And I know there's a number of other partners have left other firms. Is there any sort of rearguard action from the firms that when partners are leaving, is that difficult in any way, where kind of partners are trying to hold on to partners and they're moving to new firms? I'm just wondering, how does that work within the fellowship of corporate law firms?
Well, I can't speak about anybody else's experience. I will say that I leave behind a lot of very good friends in McCann's, and I have to say it was a very amicable split. I think that says a lot about McCann's as a firm and the partners in it. But I can't say that other people have had that sort of a positive experience, and I wouldn't want to generalise. So.
Okay, but before we go into sort of the area of work that you want to work in, what are your ambitions for Dentons? Like, where does Dentons hope to go? Are we going to be reading about it as one of the big 5 firms here, like we used to have traditionally? Is that the hope? Or is it going to be more niche than that?
The sky's the limit.
Yes.
Well, I suppose people who know me know that I don't tend to hold back. I'm very ambitious for the business, actually. We are moving to shiny new premises in Kildare Street after Christmas, which I think I'm right in saying can accommodate about 150 people. So we're certainly looking to grow, and we're looking to grow fairly rapidly, but not at the expense of quality. So we're taking our time to make sure that we get really good people with really good experience.
Well, you've also been very active in trying to develop work within this, I suppose, jurisdiction, Ireland for Law. Will you tell us about that? That's something that you've been very involved in, Karyn, where you're trying to sort of develop Ireland as an international legal hub.
Certainly, and you may have to stop me because I am a little bit obsessive about this, so apologies in advance. No, look, my involvement in Ireland for Law has been obviously on the dispute side, and just really in the last year or so, I came up with the idea of doing a disputes event that was an international disputes event, because I would spend a fair bit of time at different events around the world. I have a lot of contacts who are international practitioners. And it was clear to me from my practice and experience that there are cases where, very big cases, where decisions have to be made as to where you litigate and where people have a choice. You know, they're looking at different fora around the world and they're saying, where is the best position for us to take this very large-scale litigation? And just Dublin really wasn't part of the conversation. They were talking about Singapore. They'd be talking about the DIFC in Dubai. You know, they'd be looking at Paris, London, Amsterdam, New York. You know, those were the obvious fora. And my view on it was that Dublin had a lot to offer.
Okay, and what is that?
What is that?
Will you put a name on those different attributes that you think Dublin has?
Okay, it's an English language jurisdiction. It's a common law jurisdiction. It has all the panoply of remedies available to it that you have in common law jurisdictions, and tools like discovery, interrogatories, all of those things that aren't available in a civil law jurisdiction.
And are you talking about courts as opposed to arbitration? I mean, you're talking about domestic Irish courts dealing with international
Yes, I am for the moment, although arbitration is obviously also a key part of dispute resolution for international disputes. The other thing is obviously our positioning within the EU. You know, we have the Brussels recast, all available to us. You know, our access to the reciprocal arrangements within the EU added to our common law status, plus, you know, our tradition of constitutional jurisprudence, which is highly respected around the world. We have a brilliant judiciary. We have also a very strong tradition of the rule of law. Those are all things that international practitioners are looking for. The best way I could sum it up is, you know, I think the key thing about international disputes is relative certainty. So if you're litigating in a jurisdiction, you want to be relatively certain of the outcome.
That you know how it's going to go. Yes, absolutely.
You know, you want to be relatively certain as to how long it'll take. You want a sense that the judges are honest, that they are highly educated, that they are very capable, and that they understand the complexity of what it is you're dealing with. These all sound like basic things, and yet there are many jurisdictions where those things aren't available.
Well, you're obviously very confident that we have those in this jurisdiction, and that's a wonderful thing to hear. So how do you sell that to an international audience? So what are you doing to sell that to an international audience? Because obviously we know that we have a good system here, or we believe that our system is very good, but we have to convince others that Ireland is the spot. So how do you do that?
You do it in a couple of ways. So we set up Dublin International Disputes Week. We had the inaugural event this year, and it was really great. So we had over 2 days at the core conference and the event, we had more than 400 people in physical attendance. And then we had a number of satellite events where we had people attending remotely. And, you know, what it's about is getting international practitioners and GCs, in-house counsel, in a room to talk about the issues that matter to international practitioners. And it sounds obvious. It's not easy to achieve, but I have to say we were really pleased with the high-quality conference that we put together. And it was very much a team effort. There's a steering group made up of all the big firms in Ireland were involved and helped frame it. And it was really well received and the feedback was great. So that's one thing that you do. You get people together in Dublin and you say, okay, we can actually operate at the level you're looking for.
There was a recent event in New York as well, I believe.
That's right, yeah. There was. I didn't make that because I was on a break at the time that it was on, but it was very successful. And actually, one of the great things about the event in New York, I understand, was that you had American practitioners talking about their positive experience of using the courts in Ireland and litigating here. And that's the best sales pattern that you can have when somebody else says, I had a great experience of litigating in Ireland.
And are they talking specifically about the commercial court, the general high court, or just the judicial system generally?
I think the commercial court is where most of these types of disputes live within the Irish system.
Because I have to say, at the risk of sounding like a lefty lawyer, I always have this concern that we have there's a danger of moving into a kind of two-tier court system, because there's no doubt that in the ordinary High Court we experience delays. There are delays in the District Court and Circuit Court, where obviously the most Irish people are litigating. And I just have a concern, and I know I'm not the only one to have this, that we're looking at providing a kind of court system for the Googles, for the big multinationals, that maybe isn't being replicated for the people of Ireland. I mean, is that a concern of yours?
It is, yes. And actually, I know it's a concern of the Chief Justice, because he has spoken about it recently. I'm doing a particular job.
Sure.
Most of my litigation is in the commercial court. I do litigate in the High Court because I'm doing civil jury trials. And they, for example, of all High Court cases during the pandemic, the jury list suffered, I think, more than any others, because the jury list was suspended and cases just couldn't get on. So I'm acutely aware of that. I think that I am reassured by the Minister for Justice's statement of intent in terms of her determination to appoint quite a large number of new judges. And I think that will make a difference. Of course, you need to have somewhere for those judges to sit. And it'll be interesting to see, what the arrangements are in terms of courtroom space and so on.
But I think the commercial court, I mean, they have a sort of a fast-track procedure in the commercial court that we don't see even in other divisions of the High Court, where you really, the pressure is on to get the cases on. And I sort of wonder if that's something that should be, that there should be more focus on in the other divisions of the High Court and elsewhere in the court system to really kind of press on both getting the pleadings out and getting the cases on for hearing.
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things to that, Mark. One is, it's all about resources.
Sure.
If you don't have the judicial resources, you can't have the case management. And new rules, as you know, that were brought in a few years ago
2016,
haven't been implemented because they didn't have the judicial resources to do it. So the resources are absolutely crucial at every level of the court system. And it's hugely important to clients that those resources are prioritised. I think the second thing that I would say about that is that, there are significant frustrations still in our system. For example, a young lawyer spending hours down at the central office trying to physically file affidavits. What is that about in 2022? That does not make sense. We should have electronic filing. And things like that, we've made huge progress, but, can you make an electronic payment at the central office? I think I'm right in saying, no, you can't. So things like that really do need to be modernised. But we're getting there, and I think certainly we see progress. But, it's important at every level. But I have to be honest and say that most of my cases are in the commercial court.
Sure.
Okay, well, moving on from that, Karyn, and we wish you well with that, create more work in Dublin. I think everybody will be very happy about that. There are a few sceptics out there, aren't there?
There are.
We have talked to some partners in a previous life, Mark, and they were kind of saying, this isn't going to wash at all. But I think generally most of your colleagues are on board with this. Everybody believes in more work, I presume.
Well, look, people have different perspectives. I tend to be the sort of person, and I know it sometimes drives people mad, but I see opportunities. I don't generally see problems. And I see an opportunity here for Ireland to position itself. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yes.
But certainly I think Ireland has the ability to attract more of this complex international work. And just to, I suppose, pause and look at what they did in London, because London has been a real success story in terms of the government there recognised the value of legal services to the overall economy. And I'm not sure that happened here traditionally. I think it is happening now. I think the government does recognise the importance of legal services, but it has never been measured. And I have argued that we should measure it. We should actually do that exercise of looking at...
I think the government is quite supportive now, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I have to say that the Department of Justice in particular has been a huge supporter of Ireland for Law and of the initiative, the Disputes Week initiative. So I think that's really positive.
Okay, I'm going to bring you in a different direction now, Karyn. When we were having a little chat before we got to meet today, I was talking about other issues, and an issue that you brought up, which didn't surprise me, but you talked about diversity within the world of corporate law. And this is something that's very important to you, no surprise in that. What did you mean by that? Before we get into it, just generally, what were you getting at when you referred to diversity?
Well, when I talk about diversity, I usually start with access and inclusion and diversity, because I actually think the word diversity is used as a bit of a platitude these days. But what I'm talking about is a recognition within the commercial world that having people who all look the same and come from the same backgrounds and sound the same, making decisions within an organisation isn't good for the business. And statistically, we know there are plenty of studies to show that a diverse business, in terms of the leadership in the business in particular, is more profitable. So the business case is easy on this. But it is, you're right, it is something I am vocal about and I feel really passionately about. And I think it's something that worries me in the professions at the moment, that we haven't made the progress I would like to have seen. Okay,
and the use of language like worrying, for example, and I don't want to overstate this, but like, what are you saying is that there seems to be a kind of a stereotypical person who progresses within a corporate law firm? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think people are inclined to hire people that look like them and sound like them, because that's easy. That's an easy decision. And I think what has happened, you hear of the term greenwashing. And I think there's an equivalent. I don't know what the term is. Is it diversity washing or whatever it is? But I think that people, very well-intentioned organisations, are inclined to see it as a question of numbers. It's a numbers game. Oh, right, okay, we need more women, for example.
Yes.
Or we need, more people of colour. We need, a more diverse business. Great. Right. That's a box ticked. We've done that now, and let's apply for the prize and the awards that say we're a diverse business. And added to that, they'll bring in some initiatives. So there'll be various D&I initiatives within the organisation. And they think that's the job done. And my point of view is it's not the job done. Because to my mind, and this is very much something that Dentons, I think, are very strong on, which attracted me to Dentons as a business, is that they believe that diversity and access and inclusion are about seniority and influence, actually. And secondly, about the lived experience of people within the organisation. So just to illustrate the point, if you're, the diversity, if you imagine diversity as like a jigsaw, and you say, well, look, we've this great jigsaw of people within the business, isn't it great? But if you're one of the pieces and you just can't fit in terms of your own lived experience, that's not diversity and inclusion and access. If all the events organised by the firm involve drink, and you're, for religious reasons, not somebody that takes alcohol, that's really exclusionary.
Yes.
If you're somebody, another example of that is, big lunch events organised during Ramadan, for example, that it's not inclusive. Okay. You're invited.
What about the notion of positive action, for example? Mm-hmm. Like there's headlines in the paper at the moment about our own beloved law library, Mark, where the Bar Council has taken a decision to try and encourage firms to give briefs to female colleagues over male colleagues, because they believe that that's necessary in order to address a gender balance maybe that exists and traditionally has existed. I mean, are we talking about something like that in terms of corporate law firms? Ultimately, it is a business. And, firms will hire people that are, of assistance to that business. And maybe the people that they traditionally have hired are the people that suit that business. And therefore, diversity doesn't really come into it, I wonder.
Well, diversity has to come into it because clients are demanding it. That's the first thing. And clients are demanding it. Okay. But it's also a question of authenticity, If you actually, as a business, want to get the best people, you have to look at the structural barriers. I'm sorry to say it, it's easy to promote a white male.
But are you talking particularly about gender diversity? Or, obviously because of Ireland's immigration pattern, there wouldn't be that many, should we say, people from a non-Irish white background at the age that would be likely to be senior partners in Irish law firms, for
Very
example.
much so at the moment.
You're probably looking at recruiting, if you're looking for people from new Irish backgrounds, you're talking about people in their 20s and 30s more likely than people in their 50s and 60s, for example.
That's true. And at the moment, the most acute situation, as I see it, within the professions, and it's not just the legal profession, it is one of gender at the moment. But, it's very complex. It's not just about firms not trying to help women to progress. Firms are really trying to help women to progress, in my experience. But women very often rule themselves out. Why is that? A lot of it is to do with structural issues. It's to do with perceptions, assumptions that are made about women very often, about what they may or may not want. Maybe they don't want to progress. Well, have you asked them? So there are lots of things. But if you, for example, have a partnership where, let's say, the culture within the partnership is that people won't progress to partner unless there's effectively unanimous support for that. That sounds like a really lovely, cosy thing.
Yes.
And
is that the way it works?
It can do. It's not uncommon. But that can actually really seriously impact your ability to bring less likely candidates forward. And I'm saying less likely, not in terms of their ability. We're talking about people who are all exceptionally good. But they might just be harder to promote because it's just not so easy to see the sort of the same trajectory from a business perspective.
So can I pick up, are you saying that there is still a bit of a glass ceiling at play in corporate law firms? Is that, am I right in picking that up?
I'm saying there's a sticky floor.
Sticky floor. Okay. Yes. Okay. That's very interesting. I have to say that's very interesting. It wasn't something that I kind of anticipated. We have a lot of young graduates at the moment, predominantly female. I would have thought.
Predominantly female.
High achieving, getting into the business, doing really well, and yet they're finding the odd stumbling block along the way, obstacle to overcome.
Yeah, and so just bringing you back to the point about Denton's approach, where you're looking at seniority and influence, I suppose the question I'd ask is, in an organisation, who are the decision makers? Who are the equity partners within a partnership? A partnership may have a large number of salaried partners, but who are the actual people holding the equity? What do they look like? What do they sound like? What is their background? And I do think that's very important. And one of the things, about the Dentons team, certainly in Dublin and the broader team that I've met in other offices already, is that there is a very tangible sense of diversity. And I'm really finding that something that very much attunes with my own priorities in terms of, Yvonne Saunders is an amazing managing partner. She is really passionate about this. And she has set about creating a diverse team.
And is it just a matter of appointing and promoting, or does it encompass other things like the sort of family supports that people, male or female, may need? I mean, the traditional model of people who've effectively said you sell your soul to our firm and you work 80 hours a week, simply doesn't work for people who have commitments outside of the workplace. And, unfortunately, still in the modern world, that still generally falls on the female partner, at least certainly at certain stages of family life. I mean, is that something that a firm like Dentons can overcome?
Very much so. And I think that now Dentons is an all-equity partnership, which very much in tune with my own way of doing things. But there are flexibilities there. And actually, I suppose they have I would say they're more advanced than the traditional Irish market here in terms of their attitudes to things like agile working and flexibility and all of that.
And would that apply to Dentons in every other country? Because, I mean, they operate in so many different jurisdictions. I mean, is that a global priority?
Yes, it is, yeah. And it's quite refreshing in a way, if you see young partners coming in who need that bit of flexibility, they're at that particular time. I mean, my youngest is 9 now. So I've sort of got beyond that point where I can't pick up a book on holiday. In fact, I read 10 books on my holiday there a couple of weeks ago. But that's a whole other story. But
can I just say to you again, going back to kind of a previous life for myself and Mark, and again talking to kind of partners in serious firms, a great effort is made, and the Law Society, I think, has made a great effort to try and make working practices within law firms, more 9 to 5 if possible. But at the end of the day, if the client needs you, you have to be there at the end of the phone. Isn't that the case? You have to be available. So attempts to try and create a more normal working week or something that's more family friendly or allowing people to engage in other activities in life and stuff like that. At the end of the day, you do have to be there when the phone rings and the client says, I need advice.
True. And I mean, look, I work very hard. My colleagues work very hard, and we are flexible and available when the clients need us. But there's a huge amount of, there's a lot you can do with collegiality, actually.
Okay.
You know, I remember back in 2015, I visited a law firm in Amsterdam. I was on a bit of a fact find in relation to an initiative that we were spearheading at the time. And they were talking about how their corporate team was organised, and they had brought in this revolutionary new approach. And it was basically based on, we need more people so that we can share the load a bit more, so that we don't have people sitting at their desk at 4 a.m, that actually there's somebody you can hand it over to. And I thought that was very refreshing at the time and seemed quite radical.
And does that mean that the senior partner isn't the one who says the buck stops with me, you ring me at 3 o'clock in the morning, or, you know, that you can trust the people sort of elsewhere in the food chain to make the key decision at the key time?
I'm not sure I like the term food chain. I might just quibble with that.
Sure.
But certainly, look, my approach with my team has always been to work very collaboratively so that you have somebody else's back and they have your back. And you are always able to pick up for people when you need to. So you don't have a single person sitting at their desk saying, this is just my responsibility, and on me it stands or falls. But that's my approach, and not necessarily universal. So it's horses for courses. But I do think you can come at these things in a more enlightened way. And certainly in terms of the way that Dentons is organised, I find that there's a lovely buzz in the office. There's a sense. I mean, last week the corporate team put over 2 really enormous transactions, and you wouldn't have known it because they were all working really hard, but really good natured. There was a nice atmosphere around the place, and I think that says something about the team that has been built.
Wow, well, it sounds like a very exciting departure. I'm curious, Kildare Street, you didn't feel you needed to go down to the Quays on the Liffey, you know, with all your buddies and have coffee with them?
Well, I spent many years down at the Liffey.
Yeah.
I'm a city centre dweller, so Kildare Street is a bit of a luxury now, but yeah.
And when will the new premises be open?
Just after Christmas.
Okay, well, it sounds very exciting. Karyn, thank you. Mark, wasn't that fantastic?
That's very interesting.
Really, really interesting. And thank you for telling us about your wonderful career and the exciting future that lies ahead, and all the work you're doing to try and bring more work into Dublin, which is in all our interests. Karyn Harty, thank you so much for coming in and being a guest on the Fifth Court.
Thanks very much.
The Fifth Court is adjourned until next week.
So that's all from this episode of The Fifth Court. We want to say a huge thank you to Karyn Harty, Head of Litigation at Denton's law firm, for coming in and talking to us today and giving us that fascinating interview, Mark.
Yeah, it was a great interview. And just a reminder to all listeners, if you did enjoy this show, do share with all of your friends and colleagues on your favourite social media apps, Twitter, LinkedIn, or whichever, and let all of your colleagues know about it.
Yes, absolutely. And share. And I'd like to say a huge thank you also to the Dublin South podcast studios who recorded this episode for us and did such a wonderful job. So from myself and Mark, until next week, goodbye.